Welcome back to the Law News Network, everybody. I'm Aaron Keller, and I'll be with you for the afternoon here. We've got a couple of special segments planned for you to help you understand a couple of cases other than the Dippolito case, which is going through various preliminary steps of an appeal process. We know that the state has filed for sanctions against one of the defense attorneys, at least one of the defense attorneys, I should say, related to the way that they handled the psychological examination of the defendant. Apparently, they made plans for her to be examined. She didn't show up, and they want the defense to bear the costs of that. It's a rare move, but as we heard yesterday, Richard Tendler, who's a local attorney there who's been following this case all the way back to the beginning, said he'd be surprised if the judge doesn't grant those sanctions. And of course, we know Dalia Dippolito remains behind bars while her own appeal is playing out. So plenty of things happening in that case here in the wake of the verdict that we carried here live on the Law News Network a couple of weeks ago. In the meantime, we're going to sort of switch roles a little bit. Beth Karras is on the other side of the table here, and we're going to go back and talk about the Scott Peterson case. Because as we've been talking about here on the Law News Network, there's this new documentary playing on A&E right now. Perhaps you saw our interview the day before yesterday with the executive producer of that film. And it's generating new interest in the case while Scott Peterson's own appeal is playing out. I was a young reporter in upstate New York when this happened, but Beth Karras was in the courthouse for it. So you're the expert, and I only know basically what you reported. So I have you to thank for whatever knowledge I have of the case. People are paying attention because of the appeal, because of the film. What do you make of this new interest in this case that happened, what, 16 years ago? 15 years ago?
15 years ago. And because of the 15-year anniversary, I think that's why we're seeing these specials, not just A&E's 7-hour, 6-part series, which is on Tuesday nights earlier this week, rather. Tuesday was the episode 1, and they repeat it during the week. And I believe it'll be every Tuesday night for the next several weeks. But others are preparing specials that will air later in the fall, including Oxygen already did theirs, but Investigation Discovery, CNN, ABC, for example, there may be more. So I'm not in the A&E, but I've been asked because of my role as a reporter for Court TV to be a part of some of the others that are upcoming. And as a result, I've been revisiting, my notes and the appellate issues. Of course, I'm watching the A&E special. Now, Scott Peterson's side is saying, let me just review the facts real briefly, right? I mean, his pregnant wife disappears on the December 23rd into the 24th. He reports her on the 24th. And within 3.5 months, her pregnant body, her torso and her babies wash ashore in the San Francisco Bay, exactly where Scott said he had been fishing the Christmas Eve day. He came home and found his wife not home. So they're like, okay, he went fishing and dumped her body in the bay, and they washed ashore there. He gets arrested. He didn't testify at the trial, but he's now saying on appeal, there's a dual track in California. You have your appeal, direct appeal, because he got the death penalty, which is based on rulings in the court, evidence in the courtroom, and then you have the habeas track, which in California, because they try to fast track a little more, a little bit. The habeas is extraneous stuff, like their own investigation into things. Okay, so in a nutshell, the defense is saying between the direct appeal and the habeas that Scott Peterson, when he went fishing on the morning of Christmas Eve day, he says his wife was home, getting ready to go grocery shopping, to walk the dog. She was going to make gingerbread. They were going to her parents that night for dinner. She was alive when he left. The state says no, she was actually dead in the truck. He was taking her to the warehouse to put her in his boat and then take her to the water 90 miles away. If the defense can show that he didn't get a fair trial, or there wasn't a thorough enough investigation, and his lawyer was ineffective in not putting on sufficient evidence, and it is shown maybe in a new trial that she was alive, that means he's innocent, right? If she's alive when he left the house, he didn't have anything to do with her demise.
And he's got this claim in the A&E film that he was absolutely not the last person to see her alive. And that's his claim, that she was alive after he left to go on this fishing trip.
And it's not true, based upon my review of the evidence and what I know. I do not believe, whether you got a fair trial is another story. I can't say whether you got a fair trial. That's for the California Supreme Court to decide. But this is not a case of an innocent man in prison. I will go to my grave believing that. He may believe, and maybe a court will say, he deserves a retrial, but not because he's innocent.
You think it's just going to be because of some technicality with the way the case was tried, not a factual issue?
I don't know what the court's going to do. The court might say, you know, his lawyer, his lead lawyer was Mark Garagos, should have more forcefully challenge some of the scientific evidence, because they're saying in the appeals that the baby Connor, when he washed ashore, actually his gestational age was about a week longer, that he didn't die on the 23rd to the 24th of December. He lived at least to January 3rd. If that's the case, then they were kidnapped and he lived, and then she's killed, and that the kidnappers put her in the bay because they knew by then, the word was out that Scott said he was fishing in the bay, so they went to the bay and dumped her to frame Scott. I mean, that's the stretch. I don't know if anyone's going to buy it. The state just filed, the Attorney General's office, their response to the habeas, and the Supreme Court now has to wait for a reply from the defense. Then they're going to schedule oral argument on both. And I think there could be a decision sometime next year, which is actually pretty fast in California.
So he's claiming that someone else saw her, though. Who are
Yes.
these other people who he claims saw
People
her?
in the neighborhood and in the park. Scott is claiming that there were all these Lacey sightings. Nobody came forward like the day of that I'm aware of, or let's say Christmas Day, to say, yeah, I saw her. They were coming forward once the flyers were out on December, late on the 25th into the 26th, and thereafter saying, oh, I saw her. Now, the prosecution made a big map of sightings, like not just of the Modesto area, but the world, and pregnant women, people who were walking dogs, people who sort of fit Lacey's description, and they called as many as they could who fit that description. Not the people who made the sightings. They called the people who were walking in the park. There was a pregnant woman who fit Lacey's description, but she had a chocolate lab. She didn't have a golden retriever. She was walking around the same time. And but for some reason, the defense didn't call the people who called in the tips, the neighborhood people. They were available, and the defense didn't call them in. Now, I'm not privy to all the police reports, but it's my understanding, I am speaking with one of the investigators, that some of these people, there's no reason to believe they weren't being honest in what they recall, but Lacey walked a lot, right? And so they just may not be recalling the right day. They couldn't pin down, their times were off. They saw, oh yeah, I saw her at 9:30. Well, Scott left the house at close to 10. She was still home. And one tipster said, yeah, I remember the black pants and the white shirt. Well, when her body washed ashore, she was wearing tan pants. She wasn't wearing black pants. You know, there were things that just didn't add up. So Mark Garagos promised in his opening statement that, Scott Peterson was stone cold innocent, and he would call a number of people who saw her, and he didn't.
Do you think that there was a trial strategy decision to not call them out of fear that the cross-examination on these details that you've just talked about would make them fall apart on the witness stand?
I think so. I think he realized it in advance. I don't know from talking to him. I'm just assuming that he realized that in advance. Now, I have seen, there was something I saw, I can't remember if it was the A&E, somewhere I saw a defense investigator or a defense attorney saying that the witnesses, two of them, didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to be part of it. It became too much of a public spectacle, and they didn't want to get involved, and they were afraid, I guess, of their, the public might attack them for saying something pro-Scott. That didn't make sense to me, that they didn't subpoena them or get them picked up on a material witness warrant, that they could actually risk Scott getting convicted and going to death row because they don't want to subpoena a recalcitrant witness. So I don't buy that.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, and my whole thing is, okay, if you've got a client who is looking at a death sentence, why not put the witnesses on the stand?
Absolutely.
If you think that there's any chance, okay, maybe they misremembered the color of the pants, but if they can at least say, I'm pretty sure that was her.
They might raise doubt, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know why.
It might be enough.
Another thing I want to say is they lived on a street called Covina Avenue, and there was one more street, Edgebrook, and then the park. You enter the park, and there's this little dirt path. It's not paved. And that's how Lacey would enter the park with the dog frequently. But in October, she started feeling tired and dizzy. She got a little woozy a couple times walking, and she started walking less, but she still did walk. And her mother said, just don't you got to walk with your cell phone. Just make sure you have ID and cell phone. You're pregnant, right? So here she is. She's 7.5 to 8 months pregnant on December 23rd, and she's got a lot to do. No, 24th. She has a lot to do that day. Groceries, bake gingerbread, and walk the dog, whatever. And she's going to. And Scott says she's wearing black pants and a white shirt. He leaves, and she's must have changed her clothes because she's found in tan pants, and she takes a walk without her cell phone, her purse, or any ID, because her cell phone was in her car, battery dead, and her purse with all her ID and wallet was hanging in the closet. And Scott never checked for those when the police asked him. The police went in the house with him and found them eventually.
Well, it just seems like a bizarre thing then. If she had said she was going to have those things with her, then she didn't have them, so that would indicate that she wasn't walking. One would think.
Correct. That's the state's position. So, and that's what this case is built on, that kind of stuff, because there's nothing really forensically like tying him, right? This was, they believe, a soft kill, a strangulation, suffocation, right? There's no blood or anything in the house. And in his warehouse where he stored the boat, which is where they believe, he kills her in the house, gets her out into his pickup truck, because he backed his pickup truck to the patio door. Neighbors saw that. And when the police go in the house with him, the patio door has this little throw rug and it's scrunched up, and he takes his toe and straightens it out, but so it never got photographed scrunched up, but they report it, and they're like, but, of course, Sharon Rocha, Lacey's mother, says in her book, could it be that he dragged her out that door because he backed his truck up to that door? It was a patio, it was a door to the patio. In any event, there was a neighbor who saw him in the bed of his truck, with the truck like that, but didn't see anything else. He was like loading umbrellas and big umbrellas, which he never ended up transporting to his warehouse. They ended up back in his yard. So, they think it was a soft kill, and at the warehouse, there's a flatbed table or whatever, and there's dust from cement. And he said he had bought this 50-pound bag of cement, but it's nowhere to be found. And there is one anchor. There's one anchor, and it looks like a bucket, and he put the little handle on it. But he made homemade anchors. He had just bought the boat. He had bought the boat on December 9th. They never told anyone. He says Lacey knew, but it was going to be a surprise to his stepfather. But and there looked to be these circles in the dust. So they theorized he made 4 anchors and he weighted her down with those anchors. I saw a picture of her torso in the rocks. Her arms are off at the elbows, okay? And they were up like that. Her head was missing and her feet, part of one leg and the other foot. And it was like that. Her arms were up like that. It's almost as though she had been anchored and floated like that. And with the turbulence, because there had been a storm a few days before she washed ashore, like a turkey bone pulled apart, because her arms were up like that, but there were no arms past the elbow. So it looked like she had indeed been weighted down, but they never found the anchors, and it's not unusual to make anchors. It saves a lot of money. But they never found that empty bag or the rest of the cement. Scott said, well, I dumped it in the yard, and there is a little bit on the side of the driveway, but I don't know that it can account for one anchor and the rest of the 50-pound bag.
50 pounds of cement is not a small amount.
So it's little stuff like this that built the case.
Well, you can prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt with lots of grains of circumstantial evidence that mound up to create a desert dune. So this is that sort of a case.
Yep. So I'm watching the A&E specials, the series, very carefully. I think it's very well done. And they're trying to show some balance, but it does take the position that Scott didn't get a fair trial, and his family, of course, thinks he's innocent. And fair enough. But I'm just looking for points that I might refute. Like there was one point where they had a Sharon Rocha soundbite because she didn't participate, Lacey's family, and she's cut off in her soundbite right when I think she's about to say, and Scott told me Lacey was missing. Scott called his mother-in-law and said, I haven't seen Lacey, she's missing. And Sharon was like, missing? Why is he using the word missing? She could just be, I don't know, at a neighbor's or something. He's already saying she's missing. That was the beginning of, they didn't want to believe it until they learned that he had a girlfriend. And he had had a girlfriend since November 20th.
How did that whole thing, because that didn't come out immediately, correct?
Correct. So about a month later, the public learned about it. She, though, contacted the police on December 30th when a police officer friend of hers in Fresno said, look, this new boyfriend of yours, he's the guy up in Modesto who's got a missing wife. people thought it was a little weird that Scott just didn't want to go before the cameras. He wouldn't join the family when they would have, well, he did once though, when they would have like the vigil and press conferences or whatever, he just stayed, he said, I want to focus on Lacey. He didn't want Amber Fry, the name of the girlfriend, to see his image, is the explanation. And that's a reasonable explanation. But she learned about him and she called the police on December 30th, and from that day she started cooperating and she started recording their calls. And he had told her on December 9th, he admitted that he had lied to her and that he actually had been married, because her friend who set them up found out he had been married. And so he said, I lied to you, but I lost my wife. This will be my first Christmas without her. And he was crying and begging for her forgiveness. And she never asked him how he lost his wife. And she thought it was something tragic, an accident or a disease or something. And so she actually, Amber, got him, once she started recording calls, to admit the whole lost thing. So it got recorded. But she said it first happened on December 9th. That's the day he shopped for and bought the boat. And Amber's friend learned that Scott was married on December 6th. And she said, you got to tell Amber or I will. And so he started searching for currents in the San Francisco Bay. The next day, he started shopping for a boat. He looked at the boat on December 8th, and he bought the boat on December 9th. It was a plan. And on December 16th, he ordered 3 fake college degrees. December 16th. Days before he killed his wife, fake degrees, one in religion, because Amber was very religious, very Christian, for $300. And they were having, like, they didn't have a lot of money at that time. Lacey was pawning some of her jewelry because they were like scraping things together. They had a certain lifestyle that they were trying to maintain. $300 on these college degrees at Christmas time, and in the verification box for one of them, he says, two of the 3 degrees, he says, I hope nobody checks for verification.
These are all facts that would lead one to believe
Something's
there's guilt
weird
beyond
with
a
him.
reasonable doubt, or that at a minimum. But it seems to me that when you start piling all the evidence up, there aren't coincidences here. Or so
right.
rational people would believe.
That's right. And that's even Scott's friends, they were giving him the benefit of the doubt, but they were watching his behavior before the bodies washed ashore. When the bodies washed ashore, it was Connor on April 13th, 2003, and Lacey the next day in a different county, Contra Costa County. And so the Modesto police didn't learn about it till the 14th, that we got a torso of a female and the band of her pants, maternity pants. They're like, oh boy, this is where he said he was fishing that day. And then they learned, and a baby the day before, completely formed baby, but a fetus, there's no evidence he was born alive, but the defense says he was. Her uterus was intact, almost no other tissue, but the uterus is a strong muscle. That was intact. And there's a tear on the top of her muscle, consistent with gases building up after death. And then with the storm that dislodged her body, it dislodged the baby. He was protected in the womb for those 3.5 months. And Scott, the reports were out that these were found. Scott never called the police to say, hey, did you find my wife and baby? Little things like that. He had taken, when they were searching in the bay, because they did a lot of searching, he made 4 trips to the bay because they were tailing him, and they had a GPS device at some point on one of his cars. And he would stop and he would look to where the divers were, stay for a few minutes, and leave. He never talked to the police, never asked them how it was going, but there was just so many little things like that.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
The behavior is bizarre. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And the jury heard all this, right? There
Yes,
wasn't
the
a
jury
lot of
heard
stuff
all
that
this.
was kept away.
The jury heard all this. I'm not telling you anything the jury didn't hear. Maybe the verification box. No, I think they heard that too on the fake diplomas. But what the defense is doing right now in the appeal is saying, look, because he had searched occurrence in the bay, they're saying that should have been better refuted, that there was dog trailing evidence. The defense should have refuted the dog trailing evidence better, the fetal age evidence better, and that Garagos should have called some of these neighbors who say they saw Lacey, because if they could prove that, at least reasonable doubt, whether or not she was seen, then maybe he would have been acquitted or a hung jury. I don't know. But he never called any of them. And there was a burglary across the street that the defense says is related. The burglary was December 26th, but the defense is saying it was the 24th. It was between the 24th and the 26th, but I believe it was on the 26th. The defense believes, and A&E takes the position it was on the 24th.
Well, let me back up. I mean, if the big claim here is going to be ineffective assistance to counsel, I have to start to wonder, okay, well, why didn't the defense mount a stronger defense? Have you received any sense after all this time as to why the defense rolled out the way it did?
No, I really don't know. Mark Garagos, who has a very big reputation as a criminal defense attorney in Los Angeles, hadn't handled a capital case before. That doesn't mean he wasn't qualified. He wouldn't have been able to take the case if he wasn't qualified. But he said in the penalty phase, he gave the closing argument. He said, I wasn't prepared for your verdict. I didn't expect that guilty verdict. I wasn't ready. You know, 'cause there was 2 weeks off between the guilty verdict and the beginning of the penalty phase. And I remember sitting there in court thinking,
I mean,
I'm
looking that way at you right now. So I'm just like, seriously? I mean, is he trying to set it up for an ineffective assistance claim?
That's what I was thinking, right. I'm thinking,
is he trying to play stupid in front of everybody to try to give an appealable issue?
I don't know that he had a mitigation expert either. I think he had a jury consultant, but mitigation experts are on board right from the time the state says they're going to seek death, because they help you shape the case, they strategize, pick a jury. And I don't think he had one. I mean, I'm trying to confirm that. My notes say he didn't have one, and I've spoken with one in the last few years who said, I was contacted by Garagos after the guilty verdict, and I thought, I'm not coming now onto the case at this late stage, but he was looking around for a mitigation expert.
I mean, again, isn't there a rule or a statute that says they have to come in early in California or not?
I don't know about mitigation experts. You need 2 attorneys, and he had a bevy of attorneys. He had Pat Harris. They're good attorneys. They're good attorneys. They had investigators. He had a team of lawyers, but I don't know that he had anyone who was a mitigation expert. Now, that's my recollection from back then, so I don't want to be defaming him by saying he didn't have one, but that's my recollection.
Yeah, and we're faced in these big cases, as I am with the Stephen Avery case, of trying to remember everything from 10 years ago. And you have the benefit of having all your notes intact.
Right.
The benefit that I don't have in the Avery case is that my station's archives were wiped out. So it was a computer crash, so many of the notes were lost in the process. So what exists is what those of us who covered it have saved over the years, at least at that station where I had worked.
But you're in Making a Murderer a lot. You could get the outtakes from those producers. They could help you.
Well, but that's all content that just had gone over the air.
Yeah.
There's nothing sort of, the notes behind the scenes, who were the alternate suspects? Who were we looking at? I mean, that's all stuff that most of which I have. It sounds like you're having a similar situation, trying to remember the Scott Peterson case this many years later.
Yeah, 13 years for the trial. And I started covering it with the arrest, which was April 18, 2003. I'd go to Modesto periodically, and the preliminary hearing was the fall of 2003. But I was there nonstop from June 1st until the middle of December.
What was the mood in the courtroom when the verdict came down?
There were hundreds of people outside. The judge allowed an audio feed outside because there was no camera. I was sitting in the courtroom right behind Sharon Rocha and Lacey's friends. I watched the jury file in. This is the guilty verdict, not the sentencing. And I saw one of the female jurors go like this in the direction of Sharon. I don't know if Sharon saw her, but she went like this, and I thought, they got a conviction. And so I hear first degree for Lacey's death, and then there's second degree for Connor's, and I didn't hear that. And I was so wrapped up and sort of observing everything that's going on in the courtroom because it was a packed courtroom. I saw nothing from Scott that I could discern. He never really showed emotion. He says in episode 1 of the A&E special that he was very emotional, that he was falling into a bottomless abyss, but I don't know what was going on inside him, only he does. But now we got some drilling going on.
Construction work here in the studios, apparently, or one of the neighboring offices, I should say.
But I raced outside and got on air to just give the color and what I saw in the courtroom. But people knew the result by then, and there was a lot of cheering outside. Cheers! You could hear from the courtroom, the crowd cheering. It was a very anti-Scott Peterson community.
Yeah.
And it moved. It wasn't where the crime took place. This was a different county.
Yeah, I know that you have to run to take a
Yes,
phone call.
I've got to
so
take a call.
I'll let you run, but it's one of these cases that'll just mesmerize people for years.
Yes.
It's
Anytime you want to talk about it, I can do a follow-up on the A&E and to tell you what I agree or disagree with.
Start taking close notes. We'll have you back.
Okay,
for that.
I will.
All right, Beth.
All right.
We're going to
Thank you,
continue.
Aaron.